Good morning, everyone. This is Dr. Tim McGuinness. Today is Saturday, the 21st of May. How time flies when you're having fun. This is our SCARS weekend webinar where we talk about scams, everything about scams, scammers, and scam victims to help them understand the experience that has happened to them and how hopefully to recover from it. Joining me today is Debby Montgomery Johnson, a SCARS director. She's on her phone today, so she's a little bit square.
No, actually, I'm on a separate computer, but it's still square.
Okay. So she's not as hip as I am, but anyway.
The backup.
So we're going to begin our webinar in usual fashion. So we're going to flip over to our PowerPoint and get this party started, so to speak. One thing I want to talk about just very briefly, and I'm going to flip out of the PowerPoint to do that, is what is our purpose behind these webinars? You've heard us talk about many times the level of professionalism that SCARS provides. Myself, Debby, many of our other directors and board of directors are trauma-informed certified. We're certified in a variety of disciplines with different kinds of degrees and backgrounds that we bring to this particular situation. SCARS is a government-registered crime victims assistance and crime prevention nonprofit organization based in Miami, Florida. We are an incorporated nonprofit registered with the state of Florida. You can look us up, and I would encourage you to do so. Don't trust anyone without verifying who they are. You'll find that we are, in fact, a registered nonprofit in good standing in the state of Florida, which is our base. We also have an office in Monterrey, Nuevo Leon, Mexico. We have affiliates around the world, including Guangzhou, China. We have partner organizations in Indonesia, like our good friends at Waspada Scammer Sinta, and partners throughout Europe and the rest of the world, such as our partner organization in Poland, managed by our good friend Janina, who we are very appreciative of their support. We also have many corporate partners and advisors, like About Fraud, and numerous others. We're a formal crime victims assistance partner of the Department of Homeland Security, Cybercrime and Infrastructure Security Agency. We are registered with DOJ's Office of Victims of Crime through their annual census of professional crime victims assistance providers. We are a formal partner of the the Federal Trade Commission through their Sentinel reporting program. So when victims report these crimes to the FTC, always use the link that we supply, because that gives increased visibility and attention onto those reports. So this is who SCARS is. Our team are certified in a multitude of different ways. I have dual Ph.D.s in both archaeology and in finance. I have master's degrees in a variety of subjects, including process engineering, regulatory compliance, and most importantly, anthropology, which I use quite extensively in the work that we do here. Debby, what is your degrees in?
I actually have a bachelor's degree in political science, and
Highly useful for advocating and activism.
absolutely, mostly a school of experience over the last 50 years, 63 years, however many years.
We have a psychologist on our board of directors, as well as virtually everybody on our board of directors is and has been a victim as well. So we speak both from experience and from an academic level at the highest degree of professionalism. So I think it's important to recognize the differences that we are experts. And as the saying goes, don't try this at home. Um, but in all seriousness, there is a profound difference between the information that we provide, which is based not only on experience, but significant academic research. We have the largest library of academic research in the world on the subject, communicating regularly with academics such as Cassandra Cross and Monica Whitty and numerous other researchers who are exploring the boundaries of what these types of crimes involve, as well as staying intimately in tune with the world of psychology, particularly trauma professionals as well. Even though we are not we are not a psychological mental health care provider ourselves, we take the position that in order to be able to assist victims, we have to be of the highest professional standards. And you can see some of those standards on our corporate website, which is againstscams.org, and we encourage you to take a look at those. So, moving back, today we're going to talk about a kind of, or a family of scams that we refer to as panic urgency scams. These are different than your traditional romance scams, and we'll go into why that is in just a moment. An important notice: the views of the speakers or presenters are not necessarily the views of the Society of Citizens Against Relationship Scams, Inc., an incorporated nonprofit organization. SCARS is not responsible for the accuracy of any information provided during this presentation. The speakers are solely responsible for their comments and content. Today's webinar is being presented by Debby Montgomery Johnson, a SCARS director, entrepreneur, motivator, author, and publisher, veteran, and by the way, happy Armed Forces Day, Debby.
Thank you very much. Same to you, Dr. Tim.
Thank you. And victim supporter and advocate. I, Dr. Tim McGuinness, am a SCARS director, technologist, scientist, anthropologist, veteran of the United States Navy, and victims assistance provider, global cybercrime expert. I carry cybercrime and cybersecurity certifications from the United States Department of Defense. So that's who we are. Now let's talk about panic and urgency scams. One of the things we like to say is that if there is a form of human activity, there will be a type of fraud created to exploit it. This is a universal truth associated with these types of crimes. So, panic and urgency scams. These are scams that are usually short-lived, that involve intense pressure, creating panic and urgency from the criminals. They involve a situation where money must be paid immediately. Instead of the normal grooming, they rely on the victim being in a panic and off balance. Here. So, scammers try to put their victims, you, in a situation where the story they tell forces the victim to instantly go into a panic. And we're going to explain what we mean in just a moment. That the victim is under intense pressure and bad things will happen if they don't comply. Is unable to verify these because of the speed and the situation, has to pay within minutes or hours, and has really no choice. These are short-term cons as opposed to long cons, which is what a romance scam is. By con, I mean the euphemism of a confidence game, though these are not games by any manner of means. These are serious crimes created and managed by transnational organized criminals that are well trained in the execution of these types of fraud. These scams or fraud happen fast. In other words, usually there's no buildup. It's boom, you're in the story. Scammers force the victims to panic instead of using grooming. The victim has no time to think deliberately. They have no time to verify. It's pay or there are serious consequences, or at least the victim believes that. So they are not like romance scams. Here are some examples of these. And probably many of you have experienced one or more of these types of scams, or fraud, as they really are. You know, we use the word scam because that's the word or phrase that most victims are familiar with. But in reality, we try to discourage the use of the word scam and scammers because these are minimizing terms. They're deflections away from what they really are, which is fraud. And these people are criminals. So bear with us as we use these terms. They're not the term of choice. But we use them because we live in a world where that's what people understand them to be. So part of our objective is not only to tell you about these scams, but also to correct you so that when you communicate with others, you're using the right terms. Because if you're a scam victim, we were talking about this before the webinar started, people don't understand the psychological manipulation that goes into these fraud. So when you talk about scam, it seems like, well, why couldn't you have prevented it? The reason is it was a professional job of manipulation to create and defraud you. And as a result, you were essentially powerless. No blame. You're not at fault. It happens. All right, so moving back to the examples. Grandparent scams, kidnapping scams, accident scams, travel scams. You see what they all have in common? The supposed person who's contacting the family member or the friend, or in the case of travel scams or accident scams, could even be an employer. They're distantly separated from the person they're trying to defraud. So there's a sense of immediate urgency associated with these as well. There are also BEC scams. Now, there's many kinds of BEC scams, business email compromise, but really it's a CEO or officer impersonation scam. So let's say, for example, an executive is away on vacation and one of their staff gets a message, SMS, WeChat, WhatsApp, Facebook Messenger, email, whatever, that says, hey, I forgot to send this money to this client. Can you send out a wire transfer? IRS tax scams, typically those are going to be phone calls. Warrant, bail, jury duty scams, government impersonation, bank impersonation, brushing, package delivery scams, bait and switch that can happen in the real world. Not all scams are going to be online. So now let's talk about grandparent scams. So a grandparent scam is basically the typical modality is an elderly person who logically may have grandchildren or children. They do their research in advance a little bit. So they're going to look at their Facebook page and see if grandma has, and I apologize if that term is offensive to you, Debbie, since...
Oh, no, I love being called grandma.
Okay. I'm not a grandpa yet.
Nothing better.
Anyway, so you get a phone call in the middle of the night that says, Granny, I need help. I've been arrested by the police and I need money for bail, or I've had an accident, or my car broke down, or whatever flavor of emergency of the moment they spin. The idea is that you interrupt a person You present them with a story pretending to be a family member. Usually what will happen is grandma or grandpa will say, Johnny, is that you? And of course the scammer will reply, yes, yes, it's me. And you quickly present a very abbreviated, panic-filled, urgent scenario that the only solution to is that grandma or grandpa or whoever, aunts, uncles, send you money right then. Now, if it's during the day, the typical scenario is you've got to go to your nearest Walmart or 7-Eleven or wherever it may happen to be and buy gift cards.
Yeah.
Or go to Western Union and send money, or go online to MoneyGram and send money, or one of the others like Zelle from your bank account. The idea is that you want the victim to send money within an hour or two, because these scams tend to break down after a certain number of hours. They're a bit like fish in the sun. They begin to smell. The longer the scam goes on, the more likely it is that the victim will be able to contact family and verify the situation. Scammers do not want that. So if it can't happen within a couple of hours, you'll see that the tone will change, and it will change from a voice of desperation on the part of the scammer to more belligerent and potentially threatening. They'll escalate the potential consequences to the victim. And of course, what would we all think if you get a call like that? Have you ever gotten one, Debbie?
I have not, but one of my best friends' aunt did, and Aunt Mary. Mary never had children, but as you said, they probably went onto Facebook and saw her on there because Auntie Mary is all over everywhere. But her scenario was one of the boys, who is actually a paramedic, was in an accident, and he's at the police station. He didn't sound like him, but the way he justified what happened is that he had hit his face, he'd hit his mouth, and he had some damage to his teeth. And so that's why he was kind of talking differently. She didn't catch on, but the scammer did say, don't tell my mom, as if she, he was one of the boys. Don't tell my mom that you're doing this. Well, fortunately, Auntie Mary had a friend there that was with her. And when she hung up on the way to get the money, the friend was like, you need to call mom. You need to call his mom and find out. And she didn't want to because she was told not to, but she did. And it turns out that the son was visiting mom at that moment. But Auntie Mary went into that panic mode and was ready to go get the money right away.
Yeah.
So it does happen a lot. And I'm in South Florida, so we hear a lot about that. But grandparents and aunties are everywhere.
And these scams are, an every minute occasion or
Exactly
situation. They're happening constantly. They'll originate from, for example, India. They'll originate from Africa. They'll even originate from parts of Eastern Europe. So if victims are in Europe, these scams happen there, and it can often be someone from the Balkans, for example, or Eastern Europe. It happens a lot. Europol just worked with Lithuania and I believe it was Latvia to shut down a major call center in those countries that employed over 100 telephone operators, quote unquote. They were really scammers, and they were engaged in large-scale, massive telephone fraud. Literally billion or two in euro revenue on an annual basis.
Again, they're not trying to get $1 million out of you. They might want a couple hundred, 1,000 maybe.
Or a couple thousand, yeah.
A couple thousand, yeah.
This is a quick sort of get in, get out type of scam. They don't want it to linger. Whatever you have available, they'll take. $100, couple $1,000. If you can send them more, they'll ask for it. But there's also practical limitations. And the practical limitations are the money transfer system. So, for example, just coming out of the blue and sending a Western Union transfer, you're probably going to be limited to a few $100s. But $500 for 2 hours worth of work is not a bad sum. And one of the things that they'll also do is they'll stay on the phone with you while you go to the local store to do the money transfer, so that they can continue to apply the pressure. And also, since the victim is in a panic state, that they can help guide the victim through the mechanical steps necessary to do it. Otherwise, the victim is likely to throw up their hands and say, I don't know how to do this. I can't do this. I'm too upset, whatever. So that's essentially what grandparent scams are. Now, if any of our audience has questions and would like to put those into the chat, you're welcome to do so at any time.
The one caution on the grandparent scam is when you take the pause and you start listening. If your grandchild calls you Mimi or Pop-Pop or something normally, and on this phone call, it's grandma, that should be an alert that, wait, that's not what the kids call me. You know, initially you've got the panic because you're thinking, oh my gosh, something's wrong. But if you take that pause and breathe through it, and then you realize that, oh my gosh, that doesn't sound like them. They wouldn't have called me that. So it's just one of those tips. Just think about what they normally call you, especially if they have a pet name for you. They would never call you grandma if they normally call you Mimi.
Well, there's another way that you can verify, and this is true of most scams, where there is some degree of personal knowledge, so to speak. So we suggest to victims of romance scams, for example, that they can use a local knowledge test to verify whether or not the person that they're chatting with is from the place they say they are. Just do a Google search, find a local business on a particular street, and ask them about the business, but change the street that the business is on and ask them if they know it. They're more likely to say yes. They can even look up the business, but they're not going to be thorough. Most of the time, scammers are very superficial in their knowledge and superficial in their research, except about you. So a good example of this in the case of a grandparent scam or other emergency scam would be, should I ask Patricia to help as well? And if the scammer says no, but you made up Patricia, you know right then and there it's a scam.
Again, if they ask for money, it's a scam. Let's go back to the basics.
But the truth is, family members do ask for money. And
they do,
and sometimes it is an emergency.
Yeah. It's usually the bail bondsman calling, so.
No.
I'm kidding.
You know, having a daughter, I must say there have been numerous occasions where I had to send money via Western Union. So it does happen, but you have to verify to make sure that things are what they seem. All right. Meanwhile, let us return and talk about the next one. So this one is even more extreme. Kidnapping and threat scams. Now, imagine you're sitting at home, a parent, and you get a phone call that says, we have your child, and we want money, and we want it now. If you call the police, they're dead. Scammers do exactly that. And how do you tell the difference between a real kidnap and a scam kidnap? Particularly if the scammer can see that a child or a family member is traveling. Because let's say you send your college-age kids to, if you live in the United States, you send them to France. Well, not so much during the pandemic, but prior to that, there's always spring breaks. Perfect example for a kidnap scam. The kids are acting stupid down in Cabo in Mexico or Cozumel, and they're posting and they're checking in from their hotel and from the Maya ruins at Cozumel or wherever it may happen to be. Scammers know they're in Mexico. They're living the high life. Perfect opportunity because A, communications are difficult. They're out partying, especially during partying hours. So there's an opportunity to call the parents and say, we have your children. This happens a lot. Many times it's a real kidnapping, and it's very hard to tell the difference. And I'm sorry to say, in some places, the kidnappers may actually be affiliated with the police if it's a real kidnapping. So it's highly problematic to call the local police. The only option that you really have is you hang up, you try and call your son or your daughter or whoever it is, and if they don't answer, your head explodes. You're in such a panic that you don't know what to do. You're going to do exactly what the scammers ask for. Or a variation on this, and this often happens at the end of a romance scam, is the scammers threaten the life of you and your family if you don't cough up more money. People take this very seriously. This happened to one of our directors, Vianney Gonzalez. At the end of her romance scam, the scammers, who she thought was an active duty member of the U.S. military, threatened to kill her and her children, claiming to have connections with the Mexican cartel. Couldn't ask for a more frightening situation. And the reality is, how do you know it's not true? Well, if it's a romance scammer, we know automatically it's not true because scammers are not violent against their victims. This is a generalization and is true in 99 and 9 decimal places % of the time. Scammers can be quite violent in their home countries because they are by their nature criminals. And criminality begets violence eventually. Especially the thug level scammers, the Yahoo boys. But fortunately, the vast majority of scammers sit behind a phone, sit behind a computer, and they're mostly cowards. So
Well, this does bring to mind, though, that be really careful as far as your protection and privacy on social media, and let the kids tell them to really clamp down on their privacy, so that the world. I always worry about these kids that are 13 or 14 and they're playing lacrosse over at the local high school and they're putting pictures of themselves out there every day. That a trafficker or someone else, a predator, could go pick those kids up because they know exactly where they are, at what time, and what they look like, and they'd be gone before the parents had any notification. So just this is the beware and be aware of what's out there. And if your kids are traveling like that, make sure they have a buddy and tell them before they leave to be careful. And they're in college, so they're going to think that they know better than we do, but just alert them that this can happen.
Remind them that their brains have not completed
fully
developing. Yes, that they don't have a fully working brain until they're in their late 20s. So lock them in a room until then, please.
Yeah.
This actually raises a variation of this, which is called sextortion. In the case of romance scams, at the tail end of the scam, once the scammer's gotten the bulk of your money and the victim has discovered that it's a scam, then the scammer can flip over to sextortion as a way of extorting more money. These particular kinds of scams are in fact a form of extortion, as is blackmail and kidnapping, etc. And sextortion can be profoundly serious. Breaking the news today is the case of a 17-year-old boy, straight A student, Boy Scout, committed suicide because he got involved with who he thought was another teenage girl, ended up sharing compromising photos, intimate photos, and faced with the reality of the situation, possibly unable to satisfy the money demands that the scammers made, took his own life. That was his only way out. Because A, his family had never talked to him about scams, apparently. We can't speak for the parents, obviously. But certainly he didn't believe that he could take this situation to his parents. And this is not to blame the parents in any way or to blame the victim. But a suicide is an act of desperation. It's a final act for a person who believes that there are no other avenues available to them. This is why scam victims need to set aside their own shame and blame and talk to everyone they know, because these scams can affect anybody. Everybody can be scammed. Everybody will be scammed. We'll say this until my nose falls off.
And I was reading that article about the parents coming out with this, and just that day, earlier in the day, the mother didn't recognize any trouble in her son. She didn't know what was going on, and he didn't let out what, he never said anything. So again, it's that desperation. It's the shame that he did it. You can't take a picture back, but we all know that a picture out there is not going to kill you. It can bring, there's a lot of bullying, everything else that's involved in it. And he just wasn't ready to have the repercussions of innocently sending out a picture. But it has destroyed a family. So it's very important to talk about these things and to tell the kids to stop taking those compromising pictures.
Well,
adults too.
To do what they're going to do because they don't listen and they're risk takers, irrational risk takers. But the truth is, having naked pictures of you isn't the end of the world. You can explain it away. We have a guide on romancescamsnow.com on how to deal with a sextortion situation. Practical tips on how you can make your way through it. And if the photos surface, how you can explain it away. I encourage you to take a look at that on romancescamsnow.com. Just go to the search option and put in sextortion, and you'll find it. All right, so onward. Accident and disaster scams. So we kind of talked about this a little bit with grandparent scams, but the fact is that you can get a phone call from a brother, from a child, from a parent. Like, what if you got a call from your parents, Debbie, saying your mother is in the hospital and we need you to send money because the hospital won't take her into surgery unless they have a deposit or something like that. Of course, you live very near your parents, so you'd know instantly if something like that happened. But in today's world where friends and family live states, provinces, countries apart, these scenarios happen all the time.
I did have a friend call me up, though. It's kind of similar to this, where one of her neighbors contacted her and said that she needed help taking a picture of her credit card so that she could send it to a friend who had gotten in trouble. And my girlfriend reached out to me, and I was like, well, obviously tell her not to do that. And by the time she got over to be with her friend, the friend had already given the number of the credit card to the scammer and completely denied that it was a scammer. And when my friend went to the credit card company and said, you need to be careful, this is a scam, they wouldn't listen to her because she wasn't on the account.
Right.
So it happens again very, very quickly from the time my friend called me and said, what do I do? And I said, go over and stop her. It had already happened. So
but that's a little different from the scenario that we're talking about here, because, this is, again, most of these are going to be messages or they're going to be phone calls. They're not going to be emails. They're not going to be long-term scams.
No, this is quick.
Somebody who gets a phone call or an SMS or a message through WeChat that there's an emergency, there's been an accident. And a good example of this are natural disasters.
Mm.
So there's a lot of different kinds of natural disasters, benefit scams, etc. But one of them is somebody, for example, let's say, we live in the land of tornadoes here in Florida, but throughout the United States. We're the world capital of tornadoes. When a tornado sweeps through a town and destroys 1,000 homes, etc., oftentimes scammers can easily find the names of the residents to many of the properties that were destroyed. They do a quick social media search. They can find the Facebook profiles of the people who had their house damaged. When somebody is through a natural disaster, and I know from experience because I lived through Hurricane Andrew in 92, and my house got to nearly the speed of an airplane. The wind speed at my house was probably close to 200 miles per hour. Fortunately, it remained standing. A lot of trees fell over, but not all of my neighbors were so lucky. The point being is, often after a natural disaster, people are cut off. Cell towers go down, cell phones don't work, landlines don't work, internet connections don't work. So it's easy picking for scammers to impersonate people who have been in the disaster. And there's a variety of ways in which scammers can exploit this. Family members, they can call family members or send them messages. So if you knew that a family member, for example, was in a tornado and you got a WhatsApp message saying, hey, I need your help. Can you send $500? We can't access ATMs or anything. You'd likely do it.
Mm-hmm.
Also, scammers exploit and impersonate those kinds of victims through crowdfunding applications like GoFundMe, etc. They create funding programs and then announce them to friends and families, and they can raise thousands of dollars, and it have nothing to do with the real people, and the real people wouldn't even know it until sometime thereafter someone mentions it and they say, well, we didn't do that. So you always have to have situational awareness when you're in a disaster, both from the standpoint of the person who's receiving the call and the person who's in the disaster themselves. All right, on to the next one. Stranded traveler scams. Now, this one is a unique one, and I have personal experience in this. Once upon a time, I think it was in 1976, I was returning to Costa Rica from a trip by car up to California. So I drove the 5,000 road miles from Costa Rica to California, spent a couple of months doing business in California, and then returned to Costa Rica. Unfortunately, in Mexico City, the city is at very high altitude. To get out of the city, particularly to go to the south, you have to climb over their freaking mountains. So you sort of climb over the shoulder of Popocatépetl. You go up to about 6,000, 7,000 feet. And then you get to the edge of these cliffs that go straight down. So you're doing these switchbacks going down several thousand feet until you arrive at the Cuernavaca Plain on the other side. In typical fashion, the Mexicans put a toll booth right there at the bottom of the switchbacks. So pretty much I'm climbing the mountain doing 60 something miles an hour. I get to the bottom of the switchbacks and I'm coasting all the way down because gravity. It sucks, except when you're in a car, and then it's useful. It's fuel economy. Stop at the toll booth, and then I put my foot down on the accelerator. I had an automatic transmission. wrong. I didn't have an automatic transmission anymore. I had a pile of goo. And my car just kind of went, eh. So guy at the toll booth said, oh, there's a mechanic down the road there. So we're in third gear, and if you've ever had a car in third gear when you try and start, it doesn't move fast. So made it to the mechanic, mostly by wind, I think. A lot of beans you eat in Mexico, so that helped. And we get to the mechanic, and it's like 4 pulls, some palm fronds over the top, and 3 wrenches. Yeah, this guy's going to fix an automatic transmission. Not. So I figure out that I've got reverse gear. So I'm reversing the car going down the Mexican freeway in the state of Cuernavaca. And I'm doing 25 miles an hour. The car is so loaded with crap that I can't see out the rearview mirror. So I'm literally sitting in the driver's side window steering. And my wife at that time was operating the floor pedals.
Oh, geez, Tim.
Coordination is an interesting problem when you're trying to do that. Almost drove off a couple of bridges, but anyway. So we got probably 50 miles down the road in reverse. And it's somewhat hilarious watching the faces of people who are driving past you with their car oriented the same way yours is. Not a Mexican cop to be found. No Mexican highway patrols. They come by maybe once a week. This is 76, right? So eventually I find a housing development under construction. We managed to get off, and the architect who's managing the project agrees to try and help us. We try and get a truck to come and get us that we can put the car up on. No, so he ends up pulling us, towing us with his little Jeep, which weighs about half as much as my car does, because it was a big 70s Oldsmobile Vista Cruiser, 18.5-foot long monster car. The reality is we get to the next nearest town, we get the car into a dealership, and they can repair it. They just need a lot more money than I have in my pocket. So I have money in my business accounts, but no ability to access them. So we ask friends and families for loans so that we can get from Cuautla, Mexico, down to Costa Rica, where I can get my own money and pay everybody back. So the reality is that's an example of a travel emergency or a stranded traveler situation. They happen. Again, those kids in Veracruz or Cozumel, on spring break, they run out of money and they need mom and dad to send them some. Scammers exploit this. So to make a really short story incredibly long, the bottom line is, if you've got people traveling, set up a code word before they go. So if they're in an emergency, you know who it is. And this happens in the business world too. This has happened to me, where, for example, I was spending the better part of a year traveling back and forth to Japan. And I had one situation where locals were supposed to pay me for certain expenses. They didn't. So I had to have my company wire me money so that I could continue to stay in my luxury hotel and go out eating and surviving for a couple of weeks until I flew home. This happens. It's a real situation, but scammers also know this. And in social media, they exploit this. A good example is this actually happened to me too. Crap happens to me, folks. What can I tell you? So I was in Zhuhai, China. I'm doing the check-ins because I'm able to. I'm probably the only person in the city who has access to Facebook. Don't ask why. And so I'm posting about my business activities in Zhuhai, China, in the in the province of Guangdong, just across the bay from Hong Kong. And my ex-wife, got a message that I needed money. Fortunately, I was online and reachable, and she asked me, and I said, no, block them, don't listen. This does happen. You have to be aware of these scams in order to be able to prevent becoming a victim of them.
And today,
have you ever been a traveler and run out of money and had to go back to mom and dad?
I have not, but I just saw some friends were over in Portugal, and they actually posted that, well, they were grateful that they had bought travel insurance, but if they hadn't, this would have been a problem. She ended up contracting COVID while she was there, and they were required to stay in the city for an extra 7 or 10 days. And the insurance paid for it, but if it hadn't, what would we do? Because I don't typically pay for travel insurance. Again,
always when traveling international, get travel insurance.
Well, exactly, because this would be a perfect example of
it's
scam.
Cheap and it's a lifesaver, particularly if you get sick, because trust me,
yeah,
every time you travel internationally, something's going to hit you.
When they will fly you home or seek better medical and all that.
Mostly it's provide local local health care, and often they'll have a concierge doctor that works for the insurance companies that will come and take care of you in your hotel room.
Right. So that's just a beware and be aware.
Absolutely. Okay, BEC urgent money scams. We've already kind of talked about that. Taxes owed and arrest warrant scams. This is not a fun one. So again, it's typically a phone call. You get a phone call, they say they're from the IRS, and you owe back taxes or penalties or whatever the story is. And if you don't pay that this moment, they're going to have the sheriff come and arrest you. Well, sheriffs don't do that. If you're going to get arrested by the IRS, it's typically going to be a federal agent, IRS agent, FBI, whatever. But unfortunately, these types of scams prey on individuals frequently. There are public records associated with bankruptcies. There are public records associated with debts. Scammers actually can access your credit rating. So they know if you have significant debts, unless you have your credit files locked. You don't file for credit, or you don't ask for credit every single day. Keep your credit files locked until you know that you're actually going to apply for something. That way scammers can't access them. They can't see who you're paying what to, because they can see that if they're not locked. Surprise, surprise. Scammers have money. They can pretend to be finance companies. They can gain access to TransUnion, Equifax, Canadian, English, European credit files, Australian, New Zealand credit files. Scammers are not guys sitting on the floor in their underwear. They're professionals. They work in offices. They're well trained.
And it happens without us knowing it. I know after Lou passed away, he died in April. That next year, I went to file our joint tax, and it had been almost a year since he had passed. When we went to file, a refund from the last year from that tax season had already been sent out to someone in Fort Lauderdale. And I'm like, are you kidding? I haven't filed yet. And they said, well, you can't file electronically now because it's already happened. But someone had gotten his social and access to whatever, and he got scammed, and it affected my tax status for the next year. So it happens without you knowing it.
Yep. So it's actually advisable that when you think about filing your taxes, you also send an inquiry letter to the IRS asking about transactions that have happened in your tax account for the previous year. A simple letter asking that information, they'll give it to you. There are also forms on their website that can do that. So regardless of what country you live in, When you file your annual taxes, look on your tax agency's website to see how you can inquire about the transactions that have occurred on your tax account. Because it might be that somebody is reporting income that you haven't received. They might have gotten a refund from taxes. There may be other things that are pending in your tax account that you're completely unaware of. Scammers are not stupid. Sheriff arrest warrant scams. Now, this one is really to do with local issues. For example, Indian scammers are great at this. They'll call you up and say, you didn't show up for jury duty, and we're going to send a sheriff to arrest you, typically United States, Canada, sometimes Australia, sometimes the United Kingdom. And person will say, well, I didn't know I had to be on jury duty. Okay, well, we can resolve this by you paying a $500 fine. Go to your nearest Walmart and send us money through Western Union, MoneyGram, whatever it happens to be, right now, and we will cancel the arrest warrant. Jury duty is one example of this. Sometimes they'll say, you missed a court date for a traffic infraction and an arrest warrant has been issued. That actually is quite possible. At least it sounds possible. And you'll have to simply pay the fine, $500,000-$600,000, whatever it happens to be, in order to avoid going to jail. Who wouldn't do that? Because how are you going to know? You can't go onto the court website often in most municipalities and see. So the scammers have you over a barrel.
And remember, you may not have had a traffic violation. They're just out there. It's a numbers game, and
Right.
and they're trying to find someone. It's like, well, it reminds me of the scam where they're calling up and saying, you know, we've got these pictures of you, and we're going to send them to your wife or to your
Right.
husband or whoever, and you know, would never happen to me. But if say someone was involved in an indiscretion and they had done that, they're going to start freaking out now
No,
because
they don't even have to be involved in an indiscretion. Many times, the person will not know if they ever took photos of themselves. Or one of the scenarios that scammers use for this particular kind of extortion, going back to sextortion, is the fact is that cyber criminals can turn on the camera on your phone. They can turn on the camera on your laptop, and you would not know it. So all the scammer has to say is, we are hackers. We turned on the camera on your laptop, on your phone, at the office, and we got pictures of you and your secretary or blah, blah, blah. And most people won't even know what they did because we don't remember all the details that happened moment by moment. Memory doesn't work that way. So the reality is, a lot of times, all they have to do is say that they have something, and a person will cave, particularly if the monetary amount is low enough.
wow.
Alrighty, so on with our parade of scams. And by the way, if we make light of this, we take this deadly seriously. When we're talking about these scams, we know firsthand and through the care of over 7 million victims, the impact that it has on people's lives. So don't mistake our personalities for us making light or making fun of the impact that these crimes have on their victims. So another one that is very common are government impersonation scams. That exists kind of in a category of its own. Social Security is the perfect example of this because it's an easy demographic. You call anybody over 65 years old and they can find them through public records. Do you know that public libraries in the United States and Canada often have lists of people for use by businesses?
They do. I actually, years ago, I was I used it from one of the local libraries. I used it for my company. And you get a lot of information out of the business section at the library.
Yes, and also these information search websites that for, $10 they will give a complete picture of the entire background of a person. Once they target somebody that they believe is a good candidate, they'll go ahead and get that. And they get volume discounts too, by the way. The reality is information is available that can compromise you from a million sources. You can't stop the availability of the information. The only thing that you can, unfortunately, this is true. We lost control of our information in the 60s. Government has done almost nothing to protect your privacy. This is a reality.
Mm-hmm.
Data is money. It began with credit reporting, the most insidious, evil concept on the planet. Prior to credit reporting, banks actually had to do legwork. They had to call people and verify your references. They had to verify your income the old-fashioned way. They didn't give many junk loans in those days. Credit reporting agencies, the accuracy of that information has never been 100% solid. It's always had a degree of bogus information, which could be both harmful to the individuals identified and harmful to the financial institutions that rely on it. Today, there are dozens of financial reporting agencies. There's the three main one in the United States, but then there's agencies that keep track of payday loans and other kinds of things as well. And in different countries, there's different kinds of organizations. All of them are evil, but the reality is your data is there and you can't do a damn thing about it.
Well, and that's a good point there is, when my brothers in my relationship scam, when my brother said, do a background check, and I blew them off and said, why would I do that? Well, if you do a check, even a Google check, do it with your own name right now, something should come up. And if it doesn't, they're, like I say, they either work for the ABCs, DIA, CIA, FBI, DOJ, or they're a scammer. So
Right.
beware that the information is out there about everybody. And if it doesn't show up, there's something wrong.
Now, we're running a little bit long today, but there's some important information that I think that we're sharing today. And one of them that I want to talk to you about, just very briefly, is how did scammers get to be so professional? We trained them to be. Now, let that sink in for a minute. Me, personally, did this. What does that mean? For much of my career, I've been in the technology sector. Began my career as an engineer, both an electronics hardware engineer and then becoming a software engineer in the process. In '85, I helped found a company here in Miami, Florida, then called Block Development Corporation, which was a software publishing company. Within 4 years, we had spawned a mass market technology sales company called Tiger. Today, it's tigerdirect.com. We're involved in the sale of technology products, and for a decade, we were the largest in the United States, multi-billion-dollar company. We used outsourcing resources in a variety of ways. Scammers became skilled because in the late 90s and the early 2000s, companies across the world, Europe, the United States, went to countries like the Philippines, Africa. I personally have been to Mauritius. I've been to South Africa. I've been to Kenya. I've been to Nigeria, training call centers there in the early 2000s, late 90s, and other things at the same time. But the bottom line is, around the world, American companies specifically spent billions of dollars training workforces how to communicate with American consumers and European and British consumers and Canadian consumers and Australian consumers. Then when that market collapsed, when consumers stopped responding to Indian call centers and Philippine call centers as much, fully 50% of those companies went out of business in the first 5 years of the 20s. So by 2005, 50% of those companies had gone out of business, but their trained workforce was still there. Of the 50% that was left, half of those were able to continue in the business process contact center outsourcing, like the movie Outsourced.
Mm-hmm.
The other half went to the dark side, particularly in places like India, places like Nigeria, large-scale trained call centers. And it wasn't so much that the individual rank and file was trained, but it's their management that was trained, the people who really understood these processes and the technology that was needed to be able to do this. So the reality is, business created this situation 20 plus years ago. And the result is, we're all paying for it. Now, don't sue me, I'm sorry, I was working for a company that did this. But the point is, I know firsthand that it happened. And when we walked away, it's like all the weapons we left in Afghanistan. Do we believe that that technology, that equipment is not going to be used? Of course it is. Of course it is. And it's going to be used by the Taliban, possibly against us. This is the reality of the world. Businesses are short-sighted, government is short-sighted, and we leave things behind that can be used against us. That's the reality of the world. All right, so on to the next one. We're almost at the end here. Bank and financial institution impersonation scams. Now, one of these scams is kind of insidious, very evil. A bank calls you on the phone and says, "We're from the fraud department of your bank. We see that there's been unusual activity. Before we can proceed, we need to confirm that we're talking to the right person." They've got the script down. You give them everything they need so that they can access your account, thinking you're talking to your bank. You should have hung up at the first second and called the real fraud department of your bank to see whether or not there really was a problem. Instead, victims give this information, the scammers access your bank account, and steal everything that you've got. Worse, without you knowing, sometimes they don't take your money, but they use your accounts to launder money until the FBI shows up at your door and arrests you, believing that you're an accessory to these crimes because you didn't know. Money laundering is both a local crime and a federal or national crime. Throughout Europe, throughout North America, in most countries of the world, in fact, anti-money laundering laws have become very common and consistent across the globe because it's a primary means of controlling terrorism and transnational organized crime. Unfortunately, people get caught up in this all the time. So if anyone calls you from your bank, thank them for this, hang up, and call your institution directly. If you can't get through to the fraud department, call your bank manager or a customer service person who will transfer you to the fraud department. But don't take the word of someone who calls you. Don't trust anybody.
And what I always do too is make sure you're checking your bank accounts, all of them, every day. Savings accounts, checking accounts, business accounts. Just look at what's happening, because some things take a day or two to process, but you can catch them when they're processing. And I've made calls to my bank saying, "Hey, I don't recognize this one that's coming through. Can you see what it is?" You know.
So there's a different reason for what Debbie just said.
Well, for me, it's knowing what's going on.
In the United States, a debit card transaction must be caught typically within 3 to 5 business days, or you lose your ability to claim it as fraud. In other words, to do a chargeback. Credit card transactions, typically 30 days. check with your bank to find out what that time limit is. So if you don't catch a fraudulent transaction within 3 days and you used your debit card, you're out the money, probably. What that means is the bank can decline to give you your money back, is really what it comes down to.
Just look at your accounts daily. Don't let them just sit there.
And if you're, now this is really important actually, online banking versus regular paper banking. Online banking usually gives you additional controls that even the website banking may not. My bank, for example, on my mobile banking, gives me the ability to turn on and off my debit cards so that no transactions can go through unless they were previously authorized. Website doesn't do that. I can't do that on the phone unless I cancel the debit card. So it's important to have your mobile banking set up. If you haven't activated your mobile banking, you can go to the bank and have them help you do that. But that is, in fact, your Chinese firewall that will help you prevent fraud. And if you haven't, scammers can go online and impersonate you if they know enough information, set up mobile banking that they control for your accounts.
That actually happened to a friend of mine. I interviewed her named Debbie Silverman. It happened to her aunt. And the caregiver got all the information and was working with the scammer. And they got the online banking information and were able to siphon out the savings accounts.
Yep.
So it does, set it up yourself. Don't let someone else do it for you or do it to you.
Exactly. All right, now we're going to talk about brushing and shipping scams very quickly because we're running over time. Shipping scams. You get a message says, we're trying to deliver your package. Here's a link. Please confirm your shipping address. These are mostly phishing scams where they're trying to get your information so that they can use it for nefarious purposes. Sometimes those links are malware delivery links where they can send ransomware onto your computer or your phone or whatever. There's another variation which is called a brushing scam. This is a little bit different. You buy a legitimate product, you think, there's two variations. Buy a legitimate product and the retailer, now this could be actually on Amazon, and the retailer says, sorry, there were extra charges that you're going to need to pay. Now this can happen because the scammers have infiltrated the online retailer. Not every company online has a clue about the security of their own damn website. Pardon my French. And the reality is, Shopify, for example, has thousands of compromised retailers, according to some sources. And these are just people who used bad passwords and scammers have been able to guess them and take over their merchant and offer products and email the customers for more money. That's a form of brushing scam. There's another form of brushing scam, which is they actually buy something or ship something to a person that didn't order it. And then they call the person up and says, oh, we have delivered your product. Now the money is due, or we'll call the police for fraud. This happens too. There's a lot of variations associated with product e-commerce purchasing scams that you need to be aware of. And all of these kinds of scams, their goal is to create an immediate sense of urgency so that you'll panic and pay them. Don't forget that. Okay, I think we're at the last of our scams. Bait and switch. My least favorite. And you'll notice that there's a car salesman handing a couple a set of keys. All right. Bait and switch happens all the time, and it happens everywhere. Perfect example of this is buying something on Amazon from a company that doesn't ship through Amazon. They might be in China, they might be on the moon, who knows? So what happens is you buy a product that you think you wanted, and they ship you something else and say, sorry, that's what you ordered. But it isn't what I ordered. I ordered this thing. Well, try getting Amazon to help you. Good luck with that. So bait and switches happen there. Another kind of bait and switch is car dealer. You fill out a loan application. They say, yeah, no problem. It'll get approved. Take the car. Never do that. Because what happens? The loan didn't go through, maybe on purpose, and now they have another loan at a much higher interest rate where you're going to pay 20% more. If you hadn't picked up the car, you wouldn't be obligated, but because you did, you're obligated. So bait and switch scams happen all the time. They're usually quick turnaround. They're insidious, they're physical, they're on the phone, they're through e-commerce, they're everywhere. Make sure that you're not subject to a bait and switch. Buy only from ethical retailers when you're going to buy a product. It could be through a company's own website. Doesn't have to be through Amazon. Amazon is far from perfect. Amazon is far from reliable too. And if you're going to buy from a company that you know. And if they screw you, report them to the Better Business Bureau, to the police, to the FTC. Report every crime, every act of fraud, regardless of where it is.
That bait and switch a little bit makes me laugh. I'm thinking back of our dear friend Brett Johnson, when Brett started scamming at the very beginning and he was selling his blue elephant.
Yep.
Remember that?
This
he tie-dyed the blue elephant.
NFTs. If you bought an NFT, I'm sorry, but it's like Bitcoin. They're all bubbles. Bubbles are inherently scams. Something where the value of a thing is so inflated in a bubble, eventually the bubble bursts, right? And then they become valueless or much reduced. Now, the stock market goes through bubbles, and vast numbers of people lose everything because they panic when the bubble bursts. Some things will become valueless. Some will just be reduced.
By the tide.
If it's reduced, stick with it. Odds are it'll come back. But if it's truly a bubble that was zero value to begin with, NFTs, I'm sorry, but if you bought a Bored Ape, what can I say?
That's it.
Bitcoin is exactly the same thing. Good friend of mine invested $30,000. 12 months ago, it was $1.3 million. Well, today it's not $1.3 million, and I told him it was a bubble, and unfortunately he didn't listen. When you buy something for investment purposes, there's two things you must know. That you're going to potentially lose everything that you're investing, and two, you set a limit. You write it down, you draw a line underneath it, and you say, when it hits that amount of money, I'm going to sell, and then do it. Doesn't matter how much it goes up after that. You got what you wanted because you said it explicitly. You can't blame yourself. But usually what happens is if it goes way up, it'll come way back down.
And we're not financial advisors here. Seek your professionals. Just be careful. Just be careful.
That's not financial advice. That's seat of the pants common sense.
Absolutely.
All right. So moving forward, remember, regardless of the type of scam, there are consequences. Most victims, it will be a significant financial loss and severe emotional distress and trauma. Just remember, you were expertly manipulated. You are not to blame. Don't blame yourself if you're scammed. Everybody can be scammed. Everybody will be scammed. It's only a question of the story and the moment. It is so important to report these crimes. Every report matters. The police may not chase after the criminals, but your reports help governments to extradite them if they're in other countries, or for the information to aggregate so that eventually they have enough that they'll be able to make investigations and arrest. But reporting also restores your power and control. It helps you to accept that you are the victim of a crime and not. This information we spread around everywhere. You can go to our romancescamsnow.com website and look at a victim's checklist for interacting with the police to help you get organized before you report. You can report to the FBI, the FTC, and to the SCARS Global Reporting Network through anyscams.com. By the way, when you file a report, don't lie about the report. These are criminal complaints. If you falsely report information, that's a crime in and of itself. So, also, if you make a mistake, the report is not going to be deleted ever. So if your scammer calls and pleads, oh, but I'm not really a scammer, I'm just misunderstood, I really do love you, don't expect SCARS or the police to delete the report. We're not going to do it. The report is a permanent record of what you filed. But it's important that you do this. Remember, most of these crimes use impersonation of one type or another. Avoid stranger phone calls, emails, texts, message requests, friend requests, etc. Most real government agencies will not call you. They will send you a letter in the mail. Verify everything. Never respond to their demands immediately. Ask family and friends for their opinions and listen to them. And report every scam, every crime. Now, the aftermath. After this is all done, you may be very traumatized. We're here to help. We offer do-it-yourself recovery and real professionally managed victim support groups. We also recommend to every scam victim that you see a trauma counselor or therapist. You can find counselors or therapists on opencounseling.com for low-cost or pro bono counseling, or on the Psychology Today website. They have a very up-to-date directory of counselors and therapists worldwide. Be proud of yourself. You've discovered and ended the crime. Regardless of how it progressed, whether you lost money or not, at least you ended it. Now focus on getting the rest of the work done. That includes you. Get it reported and then focus on yourself. Don't focus on the scammer. SCARS is also a publisher of many books specifically designed for scam victims. We provide support tools such as our Blue Book journal, specifically designed for scam victims, our Red Book, designed as an organizing tool to help you get all of the information about your crime organized and ready for the police and as a permanent record, our Green Book self-help recovery guide, and many others. You can visit our SCARS store at shop.againstscams.org. All of SCARS services are free. Our websites are free. The only thing we charge for is the books, because there is a cost associated with printing each one. And they're very nominally charged. So we hear you. We are SCARS, the Society of Citizens Against Relationship Scams, a government-registered crime victims assistance and crime prevention nonprofit organization providing support and recovery services to scam victims worldwide. I personally have 31 years of continuous experience. I was first helping to educate people about scams in 1991, before the web came into existence. SCARS has helped a little more than 7 million scam victims through education and information. We have a little under 12,000 scam victims have gone through our SCARS recovery program and support groups. We know what we're talking about. Please help. If you can help us, we need your help to continue to provide free services that we offer scam victims worldwide. Please donate. It is quick and easy, and your generous gift will help us offer more services to more scam victims. You can donate at donate.againstscams.org. Thank you. particularly important as the battle moves into the United States Supreme Court. It's going to be an extremely expensive proposition to assist the justices of the Supreme Court to fully understand the impact of scams and why the Texas law is so important for scam victims. You can learn about us and verify us at againstscams.org and romancescamsnow.com. Remember, report all scams and scammers to the FTC and anyscam.com. Please stop listening to scams and scammers. We'll have another webinar next Saturday. Next Saturday's webinar is going to be Debbie and I talking to the family and friends of scam victims to help them more completely understand what the victim is going through, what recovery looks like, why what they do before the scam, and why they do what they do after the scam, so as not to judge them and to be supportive and accepting. Remember, never again. You have it within your power to avoid scams and to help others avoid scams. An important notice: SCARS is not a mental health care provider and does not provide counseling or therapy services. The statements or publications of our team are not intended to provide medical, legal, or financial advice. This is just a conversation between members. Any information provided or discussed is not intended to replace competent professional medical, legal, or financial advice. Consult a medical, psychological, legal, or financial professional before taking any actions or responding to any suggestions from others, including educational information provided by SCARS. Thank you for listening. Now, any questions, or have your heads exploded?
A lot of information today.
There's a lot of information always. Our goal is not to make this so much a conversation, but to transfer the knowledge that we have as professionals, as experts, so that you can stay safe online, on the phone, in chats, in texts, whatever communication medium you're using, so that you can help identify scams for yourself, your family, and your friends. And know what to do about them if you have become a victim. Questions?
Thank you very much, Dr. Tim. I haven't seen any questions today, but I'm sure people will listen to this and we'll have them later on.
Well, thank you everyone for joining us live during our webinar. Of course, this will be recorded. The recording, copyright 2022 SCARS, and it will be available on our Facebook news and information page. It'll be available on our Twitter account. It'll be available on our YouTube channel, and they'll also be available on romancescamsnow.com and any place else that we click along the way. So thank you, Debbie, for joining us. We ran about 15 minutes over for an hour, but a lot of information today covering a lot of different topics.
Appreciate it, Dr. Tim.
Any final words, any final thoughts?
My final words are always beware and be aware. And if you've been a victim, stand up and speak up, report it, and get it out, because it's the only way you're going to recover from the inside out.
Excellent. Thank you. And remember, we offer professionally managed support groups on Facebook. So just look for SCARS in our groups and you will find us. Look for our SCARS pages on Facebook and on many other social media platforms as well. Thank you everyone for joining us today. This concludes our webinar for Saturday, the 21st of May. Thank you all for joining and for listening. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye, Tim.